By the mid-1800s, the United States stood deeply divided between two very different societies. The North had become industrial and urban, embracing wage labor and new technology. The South, on the other hand, remained largely rural and depended heavily on enslaved African Americans to produce cotton and tobacco. This economic difference created opposing worldviews. While many Northerners viewed slavery as morally wrong and economically outdated, Southerners believed it was essential for their prosperity and social order. As the country expanded westward, the debate grew fiercer. Should new states allow slavery or not? Every new law and compromise, like the Missouri Compromise and the Kansas-Nebraska Act, only delayed the inevitable clash. The balance between free and slave states became unstable, and political tensions exploded into hostility. By the late 1850s, the United States was no longer one unified nation, but two opposing worlds on the brink of war. The presidential election of 1860 became the breaking point for the fragile Union. Abraham Lincoln, representing the new Republican Party, ran on a platform that opposed the spread of slavery into Western territories. Though he promised not to abolish slavery where it already existed, Southern leaders refused to believe him. The South saw Lincoln's victory as a direct threat to their way of life and economic foundation. When Lincoln won without carrying a single Southern state, outrage swept through the region. Many Southerners felt that they had lost their political voice in the federal government. Within weeks, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union, followed by several others. Lincoln, calm but determined, faced an enormous challenge even before taking office. His election symbolized hope for freedom to some and fear of destruction to others, marking the first step toward a devastating national conflict. In early 1861, after Abraham Lincoln's election, 7 Southern states seceded from the Union: South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. They formed a new government called the Confederate States of America, soon joined by 4 more states. The Confederacy chose Jefferson Davis as its president and Richmond, Virginia as its capital. The South believed they were defending their rights and independence, especially the right to maintain slavery. They created their own constitution, modeled after the U.S. version, but protecting slavery explicitly. Meanwhile, the North viewed secession as illegal and a threat to the nation's unity. Both sides began preparing for war, building armies, gathering weapons, and choosing allies. What began as a political dispute had now turned into a national crisis. The dream of a united America was collapsing, and the country stood at the edge of violent conflict. The first shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter, a Union fortress in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. In April 1861, Confederate forces demanded that the Union troops inside surrender. Major Robert Anderson, the Union commander, refused. Before dawn on April 12, 1861, Confederate cannons opened fire, bombarding the fort for 34 hours. The sky filled with smoke and fire as shells exploded over the harbor. Outnumbered and low on supplies, the Union garrison finally surrendered. Remarkably, no one was killed during the battle, but the event changed everything. News of the attack spread quickly across the nation, igniting outrage in the North and celebration in the South. President Lincoln immediately called for 75,000 volunteers to defend the Union. In response, 4 more Southern states seceded. The United States was officially at war. A brutal 4-year struggle for the nation's soul had begun. After Fort Sumter, both the Union and the Confederacy rushed to build armies. Young men volunteered eagerly, believing the war would end quickly. But early battles proved otherwise. The First Battle of Bull Run, Manassas, in July 1861 shocked the North. Confederate forces won, showing that victory would not be easy. Soldiers faced harsh conditions, poor food, and deadly diseases in muddy camps. Both sides used outdated tactics against new weapons, leading to heavy casualties. Families were torn apart, with brothers sometimes fighting on opposite sides. Despite early losses, the Union reorganized its army under new generals like George McClellan, while the South placed its hopes in Robert E. Lee's brilliant leadership. The war was becoming longer, bloodier, and more personal than anyone expected, a grim struggle for control, identity, and the future of the divided nation. By 1862, President Lincoln realized that ending slavery was essential to saving the Union. The war had to become a moral crusade, not just a political fight. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territories were now free. Though it didn't free everyone immediately, it transformed the war's purpose. Freedom became the Union's cause. The proclamation encouraged thousands of African Americans to join the Union Army, fighting bravely for their own liberation. It also prevented European nations from supporting the Confederacy. Lincoln's bold action reshaped America's destiny, giving hope to millions and striking a powerful blow against the institution of slavery. The war was no longer just about uniting the states. It was about defining what kind of nation the United States would become, one truly built on liberty and equality. In the summer of 1863, the Confederate Army, led by General Robert E. Lee, invaded the North, hoping for a decisive victory. The two armies met at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in a fierce three-day battle from July 1st through 3rd, 1863. It became the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, with over 50,000 casualties. Cannon fire shook the hills, and fields turned red with sacrifice. Lee's bold charge on the final day, known as Pickett's Charge, failed disastrously. The Union, led by General George Meade, held their ground and forced Lee to retreat south. This victory lifted Northern morale and marked a major turning point in the war. Later that year, President Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, honoring the fallen and reaffirming America's commitment to freedom and equality. Gettysburg proved that the Union's cause was worth every struggle and every life given. While soldiers fought on distant battlefields, life at home changed dramatically. Women stepped into new roles, running farms, factories, and hospitals while caring for families. In both the North and South, civilians faced shortages of food, clothing, and medicine. The war brought economic hardship, inflation, and emotional pain as families waited for letters from loved ones. Newspapers printed lists of the dead, and fear grew with every passing month. In the North, industrial production increased to support the Union Army, while the South struggled under blockades that limited supplies. African Americans in the North organized to support the Union cause and advocate for freedom. Despite suffering, ordinary citizens showed incredible resilience and unity. Their courage and endurance helped sustain the war effort, proving that the battle for the nation's future was fought not only on the front lines, but also in every American home. In 1864, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman launched a bold campaign through Georgia to crush the Confederacy's spirit. His March to the Sea
began in Atlanta and ended in Savannah, leaving a 300-mile path of destruction. Sherman's troops destroyed railroads, factories, and farms that supplied the Southern Army. This was total war, targeting not just soldiers, but the South's ability to fight. The march broke Confederate morale and hastened the war's end. Along the way, thousands of enslaved people followed the Union soldiers, finding freedom behind their lines. Though controversial for its harshness, Sherman's campaign achieved its goal. It crippled the Confederate war effort and proved that the Union was unstoppable. By Christmas 1864, when Sherman telegraphed President Lincoln, "I present you Savannah as a gift," the nation knew that victory and the end of slavery were within reach.
By spring 1865, the Confederate Army was exhausted and surrounded. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee met Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, to surrender. The meeting was respectful. Grant offered generous terms, allowing Confederate soldiers to return home peacefully. The war, which had claimed more than 600,000 lives, was finally over. Across the nation, joy and sorrow mixed. Freedom had been won, but at a terrible cost. President Abraham Lincoln called for healing and unity, but only days later, he was tragically assassinated. The country entered the Reconstruction era, facing the challenge of rebuilding the South and integrating millions of newly freed people into American life. Though peace had come, the struggle for equality was far from over. The Civil War had ended slavery, but it also began a new chapter, the long journey toward true justice and unity.